we know that quality is subjective, and we know that it is held in the eyes of the purchaser, not in the eyes of the supplier. So if you're selling a product or you're selling a service, you might think that what you're delivering is of high quality, but what you think doesn't actually matter. How's it going, everybody? It's Tuesday, so that means we're going to be talking about turning it up. So it's all the sort of things that we want to think about when it comes to smaller businesses and maybe when we're trying to get our own sort of thing going and those things. And I wanted to pick up on something that I talked about in episode 15. If you haven't seen it, go back and take a look. And there I talk about how we define quality. Now, it was quite a long discussion that I had, maybe about 10-15 minutes, but I think it's worthwhile having because I think it also dovetails into what I want to talk about today, and that's the idea that quality is subjective. And we know that quality is subjective, and we know that it is held in the eyes of the purchaser, not in the eyes of the supplier. So if you're selling a product or you're selling a service, you might think that what you're delivering is of high quality, but what you think doesn't actually matter. What matters is what the person buying it, what your customer's view is of your quality. And that's why a lot of companies will always look at the number of returns and the number of complaints they have about their product and what have you for quality reasons as the number one quality KPI. But that's not really very useful, and it's a very poor indicator of what your return business is and what your customer satisfaction with your product is. So you need to find out better ways to engage with your customers to make sure whether you're delivering what is quality and whether you've understood subjectively whether your audience or your customers identify with the quality of what you're producing as a product. So that's quite a complicated setup to the discussion, or at least, what I want to share today. But I think it's really important that we think about it in not absolute terms. A lot of people can talk about quality as if it's a science, and to some degrees it is when it comes to precision manufacturing, when it comes to making sure that you engineer different processes and you execute processes consistently. But if we talk about it particularly in a small business context, those are less important because you're unlikely to have the same sort of level of organization to be able to do process management in that way, and you probably even want to avoid that because that's when you start to lose flexibility and become much more rigid in the way that you're working. And as a small business, you want to try and maintain your flexibility and your agility as much as possible. And then just because you remain flexible and agile does not mean that your quality should necessarily suffer. You can start by just starting with your basic product and doing a bit of focus work with friends and family and your first few customers, asking them for a bit more feedback and a bit more detail, maybe offering customers a discount if they give you some more feedback on future products and what have you. And then you can start to also ask people, your audience, not just your customers, but your audience, what it is that they want to see in different products. How do they feel about these things? What do they compare it to? What category do they put your product in? So that you can then start to gather more intelligence about which products are leading in the market that you're in and what's the difference between those products from an offering perspective and their quality versus the ones that are maybe not doing so well. So that then you can start to understand where you should position your product from a quality perspective and how it should be. There are several things that you need to consider, particularly if you're talking a physical product. You obviously need to consider how well it's going to handle through distribution, before a store or after a store going to the customer. You also need to handle the quality of the product inside the packaging. The distribution is managed by the packaging, obviously. And then you also need to be able to manage the processes that go on between you and the customer around that product and that package as well. So ordering, shipping, follow up on shipping, returning, and looking for information as well. Those are the sort of things that you need to consider as the very fundamental basics of any quality work that you do. And whilst this is always going to be subjective, that's never an excuse to not put an effort into managing that in the best way that you can up front, and then making sure that you try and tighten the feedback loop between you and your customers as much as possible so that you can ensure that if anything is below expectations, that you can do something to remedy that to that individual customer, but also that you can remedy that in your processes, in your product, in your packaging, in order that that doesn't happen again. So that's a very quick run into quality and, you know, the subjective nature of it, but some of the ways that you should be able to manage it quickly, particularly in a small business context. I know we've gone through that very quickly, but I hope it's been valuable to you. Drop me a comment if you have some further views about this sort of subjective nature of quality and how to manage it from a small business point of view. And I look forward to talking to you all tomorrow.